I was sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped ceramic mug when my phone buzzed. It was Linda, an old colleague from my firm days, now retired and forever knee-deep in community gossip. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, maybe the silence in the house, made me answer. "Michael," she said, voice already full of meaning, "I just saw the announcement in the Pacific Ledger. Emily's getting married. Did you know?" I smiled politely, even though she couldn't see it. "No, I didn't." A pause. An awkward shuffle of breath. "Oh, well, it's a lovely write-up. Big vineyard wedding. Looks like it's going to be quite the affair." I just assumed. "Thanks for letting me know, Linda," I cut in gently. "I appreciate the call." We exchanged a few more hollow pleasantries before hanging up. I set the phone down slowly, as if it might shatter. I stared at the screen a few moments longer, hoping it would ring again. It didn't. "There was no mention of me in the announcement," she said. Of course there wasn't. I hadn't heard from Emily in over a year. Not since she took the position at the firm in San Diego. Not since she started dating that investor boy, whatever his name was. I'd sent a text when I found out. "Proud of you," I wrote. No response. It didn't surprise me. But still, there's a difference between expecting something and seeing it confirmed in ink. I stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out the old wooden box I kept tucked behind a stack of legal casebooks. It was one of those sentimental things I pretended I didn't keep. Inside, birthday cards she made when she was little, ticket stubs, a dried daisy she once picked and insisted I press between the pages of her bedtime storybook. And then, buried beneath the paper memories, I found it. The photo. Emily, age 10, grinning with a mouthful of missing teeth, standing in front of the gates of Cypress Glen Vineyard. Her hair was tangled from the wind, her cheeks sunburned, her arms clutching a wooden crate of grapes. She had insisted on helping with the harvest. I'd taken her there for the weekend, just the two of us, before her mother's family decided that real vacations shouldn't involve dirt or sweat or wine-stained boots. I remembered how she looked up at the stone archway and said, "Daddy, one day I want to have a party right here. A grown-up party with music and cake and dancing. You'll come, right?" I had laughed, nodded. "Of course. I'll wear a tie and everything." Now, apparently, she was making good on that promise. Just without the part where I'd be standing there beside her. I ran a thumb across the glossy surface of the photo. The paper had started to curl at the edges. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe she thought I wouldn't want to come. Or worse, maybe she didn't care if I did. Maybe she'd convinced herself it would be easier that way. I tucked the photo back in the box, but not before glancing at it once more. It's strange, the way time folds. One moment you're holding a crate of grapes with your daughter under a warm sun, and the next you're a stranger to her most important days. I set the box down and walked back to my desk. The coffee was cold now, but I drank it anyway. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anger. Not even grief, really. It was that peculiar weight of something unresolved, like a door left half open in a house you don't live in anymore. You keep telling yourself it's not your place to close it. And yet, it lingers. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional moan of the floorboards contracting with the night air. It was the kind of silence that draws out memory. She used to call me Dad the Dragon when she was small. Not because I was scary, quite the opposite. It was a game. I'd crouch low in the hallway, breathe dramatically, and chase her around the living room, roaring until we both collapsed in laughter. She'd scream, "Not the toes. Not the toes," and I'd scoop her up and pretend to nibble them. Her mother hated that game. Said it was too noisy, too messy, too feral. When Emily turned 11, the game stopped. Not abruptly, just subtly. That was the year her mother remarried. A tech consultant with a vacation home in Jackson Hole and a wine fridge the size of our old dishwasher. He was polite, well-groomed, and knew how to shake hands like a senator. The kind of man her mother's parents could introduce at fundraisers without clearing their throats. After that, I became the other household. Weekends only. Scheduled. Civil. Our time was bookended by airport pickups and calendar invites. She never said she resented it. But children don't always need to say things aloud. You learn to hear them in the silences. I made every effort. Parent-teacher nights. Science fairs. Even when I knew I was the only parent who'd be showing up with dirt under his nails from a full day in court. But slowly, her tone changed. She still smiled, but less often. Her hugs got shorter. By high school, it was all surface. She went to Stanford, a scholarship I helped negotiate when the admissions office raised questions about early filing errors. I remember how proud she was when the acceptance came. I offered to frame the letter. She declined, said her stepfather already had. That was the beginning of the erasure. I never pushed, never yelled. I figured time would smooth the edges. That eventually, she'd ask questions. That one day, over coffee or lunch, she'd say, "I never really understood what happened between you and Mom." But she never did. The silence hardened instead of softened. Now she was marrying into a family I knew by reputation, old money from Marin County. The kind who vacationed in Lake Como and played squash instead of tennis. Her fiancé, I'd heard, was in venture capital, something about health tech and wearable data. I'd looked him up once, just to be sure. Well-manicured LinkedIn, Alma Mater Columbia, a quote from The Art of War in his profile bio. Of course. I imagined the wedding. Long tables under string lights. A jazz quartet. Place cards in calligraphy. Handwritten vows and artisanal desserts. And me nowhere. I didn't blame her. Not fully. She had built a life that no longer needed my corner of it. And maybe that was the most painful part, not that I was being excluded, but that the exclusion wasn't even an event. It was quiet. Efficient. Like an outdated app deleted from her phone. Unnecessary. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the vineyard. Cypress Glen. She had picked that place on purpose. It wasn't just any estate. It was ours, in a way. A dusty, sun-soaked memory lodged deep in her childhood. I had brought her there because it felt human, imperfect, a little wild. She had fallen in love with it then. Was that memory still alive for her? Or was it just another Pinterest-perfect location vetted by her wedding planner and the groom's mother? I didn't know. But I knew one thing: if she had picked that place, our place, and still didn't think I should be there, then maybe she hadn't just erased me. Maybe she'd rewritten the story. The morning after the announcement, I told myself to let it go. To be the bigger person. To turn the page. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed Cypress Glen Vineyard into the search bar. Old habits die hard. When you've spent most of your life in real estate law, you don't just see properties. You see footprints, trails, inconsistencies. You see what's missing. The vineyard had changed hands over the years, but I remembered its bones: the old stone mill, the gravel paths, the way the fog clung low over the vines in early morning. Now it was listed as part of a heritage hospitality portfolio owned by a boutique group out of Sonoma. Their website was slick, full of soft light and curated testimonials. Words like elevated, bespoke, and timeless floated across every page. But as I skimmed their filings with the County Land Registry, something snagged my attention: a permit amendment filed 6 months prior regarding event capacity expansion. A minor thing on the surface. But the parcel ID on the application didn't match the historic zoning boundary listed in the original deed. A typo, maybe? Or maybe someone was rushing paperwork. Either way, it was wrong. And once something's wrong, it opens the door to scrutiny. I clicked deeper. The vineyard had hosted only 3 weddings in the past 12 months, far below the regional average for a venue of that size and prestige. A few reviews mentioned last-minute cancellations. One couple cited internal ownership transitions as the reason their deposit had been refunded. Odd. Curiosity got the better of me. That weekend, I drove up. I dressed the part: loafers, pressed shirt, sunglasses clipped to my collar. I'd seen enough clients play this role over the years: the urbane wine enthusiast, equal parts curious and aloof. I didn't make a reservation. Just showed up mid-morning, like someone accustomed to being welcomed. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as I pulled in. The vines were still lush, but overgrown at the edges. The signage was fading. The parking lot had only 2 cars. Inside the tasting room, a young man with flushed cheeks and a nervous smile greeted me. "Welcome to Cypress Glen," he said, with a rehearsed warmth. Are you joining us for a tasting or just visiting the grounds? Just looking, I said, glancing around. Hadn't been here in years. Used to come with my daughter. Thought I'd see what's changed. He offered me a pamphlet, then busied himself behind the counter. I wandered slowly, taking mental notes. The windows were clean, but one had a crack sealed with tape. The terrace chairs were mismatched. The flower beds were half dead. Nothing blatant, just that faint scent of decline. Out back, I stood at the stone wall overlooking the lower vineyard. The air was sharp with eucalyptus. The old wooden gazebo still stood at the far end, though its paint was peeling. That was where Emily and I had eaten our sandwiches that day, mine soggy from the cooler, hers smeared with jam. She had named a row of vines the Princess Line and claimed they grew sweeter grapes because they were treated better. I remember laughing and playing along, never correcting her. Now, the princess vines were wilted, untended. Something was off. Not broken, but stressed. Like a business trying to appear solvent while the walls creaked inward. I'd seen it before, high-end veneer, low-end panic. I returned to the tasting room and bought a bottle I didn't want. The young man rang it up with too much gratitude. Is the venue still open for weddings? I asked casually. He hesitated. Yes, but we're not booking as many lately. Some restructuring going on. New investors, I think. Not sure. Above my pay grade. I nodded, thanked him, and walked back to the car. As I pulled away, I looked at the gates through the rearview mirror. The same iron arch that once welcomed a little girl and her father now rusted at the corners. This wasn't about pettiness. I didn't care about crashing a party or proving a point. But I saw something in that place, a story unraveling, a quiet opportunity, and I knew how to read stories like that. Sometimes, what others discard becomes your leverage. I didn't act impulsively. That's never been my way. When you've spent decades navigating contracts and courtrooms, you learn to let the dust settle before you move. Emotions are like wind, they come strong, then disappear. Paperwork stays. Back at home, I pulled up the property records again, this time digging deeper. Cypress Glen was technically owned by a limited liability company under the Hospitality Group's umbrella. That group, in turn, was a collection of joint investors, mostly passive capital, a few board members, and a management team based out of Sausalito. The kind of setup that looks tidy until cash flow tightens and responsibilities blur. I ordered copies of their most recent filings. Most of it was the standard boilerplate, but buried in an annual report was a small line item, capital infusion pending, Q3 projection. Translation? They were bleeding slowly, likely waiting on a new investor to bail them out before the next quarter. And I had just walked their empty tasting room. So I called an old acquaintance, someone who owed me a favor and worked discreetly. I need a shell, I said. Quiet. Clean. No ties to my name. Real estate. Majority stake in a vineyard. Buying wine now? Not wine, I said. Leverage. We formed the holding company within 48 hours. Standard Delaware registration, layers of anonymity, no red flags. I funneled the funds through a trust I'd been managing since retirement, leftover from a case settlement years ago. Money I'd never touched because I never needed to, until now. I drafted a letter of interest and sent it directly to the managing director of the hospitality group. Formal, polite, and structured to show I wasn't a hobbyist looking for a vanity asset. I framed it as a strategic portfolio addition, a desire to preserve the integrity of a struggling heritage property while bringing in low-touch capital. The kind of letter that says, I'm not here to gut you. I'm here to preserve you. Just with different rules. They didn't respond right away. A week passed. Then a call. Mr. Carrington, is it? The voice was calm, clipped. Corporate. That's correct. I'm calling in regard to your letter about Cypress Glen. I'll be frank, your timing is unusual. I find unusual timing usually reveals more than convenient timing. He chuckled, but without warmth. We're not officially on the market. I'm not asking for official. I'm offering private capital with minimal public noise. You need a buffer. I need a foothold. Another pause. What exactly are you after? 51%. That's not a buffer. That's control. I don't need daily operations. Keep your staff. Keep your tasting notes and wedding planners. I want strategic decisions, land use, event authorizations, financial structuring. That's it. And why Cypress Glen? I could have lied. Said something about heritage value or market stability. But I didn't. Let's just say it has personal history. I know the land. I know the vines. I know what it's worth. And what it will be worth when properly managed. He didn't press. A few days later, I received a counteroffer 49%, with an option to increase after 1 year. I declined. Sent back a revised version. 51, no delay, expedited due diligence. The vineyard wasn't worth fighting over. Not if their investors were as tired as their soil. 3 weeks later, the papers were signed. No headlines. No announcements. Just a series of PDFs, notarized signatures, and escrow confirmations. My holding company now held controlling interest in the estate, effective immediately. The ink hadn't even dried when I received the digital access packet. Passwords, management dashboards, staff contact sheets. A virtual key to the gates I once stood in front of with a grape-stained daughter on my shoulders. I clicked through the interface. There it was, event approval permissions. A simple toggle. Enabled or disabled. Nothing flashy. Just administrative power. Quiet power. That's the thing about leverage, it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers from a checkbox. I didn't disable anything. Not yet. I wasn't here to ruin a wedding. I wasn't here to embarrass my daughter. I was here because someone decided I no longer had a seat at the table. So I bought the table. And now any event, any ceremony, any celebration held on that vineyard soil needed my written consent. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who once danced between vines and dreamed aloud of her perfect party, now planning that party in the exact place we had shared, and doing so without me. She may not have invited me, but now, in a way she couldn't ignore, I was already there. I kept the letter brief. Just under 3 paragraphs, written in clean legalese, the kind that leaves no room for misinterpretation. Addressed to the lead planner at Winslow and Crane Events. I had confirmed they were managing the wedding through the venue calendar and internal messages from the Cypress Glen booking portal. To whom it may concern. Please be advised that all large-scale events held at Cypress Glen Vineyard now require written approval from the controlling stakeholder in accordance with Article 4 of the updated Operations Agreement. As of date, I serve in that capacity. Any upcoming events without prior coordination may be subject to legal review and potential revocation of access privileges. This is not a cancellation, merely a procedural clarification. Sincerely, Edward Carrington, Managing Partner, Cavan Hill Holdings. It was direct, non-confrontational, but unmistakable. I hit send and waited. Less than 48 hours later, the phone rang. Unknown number. West Coast area code. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. Silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a year. Dad. Her voice caught. I could almost picture her in some glass-walled office, standing by the window, staring out as she gathered the nerve to speak. I got a call from the wedding coordinator, she said. She said there's some restriction? Some issue with approvals? Something about a new investor. That's correct. What's going on? I didn't rush to answer. I let the quiet stretch, let her sit in it. Finally, I said, "You're getting married at Cypress Glen." Yeah. So? I waited again. I wanted to hear it from her. But she said nothing. That place meant something to us once, I said. Years ago. Grapes, sandwiches. You called one of the vine Rose the Princess line. A long pause. You remember that? I remember everything. More silence. Why would you do this? She asked finally. Her voice wasn't angry. Not yet. Just confused. Guarded. Maybe even a little scared. I haven't done anything, I said calmly. The venue is still available. The wedding can proceed. But it does require my consent. But why? She repeated. Why go to all this trouble? Why this? I closed my eyes. Because you're getting married at a place we once shared. A place you once asked me to return to when you were older for a party, remember? You said I'd be there. I was a child. I know. Another beat of silence. I didn't think it mattered to you, she said, and this time there was something in her voice, something raw and unpolished. You didn't think I'd care that you were getting married? Or that you were doing it at Cypress Glen? I didn't know how to include you. That stung more than I expected. Not, I didn't want to. Not, I forgot. But I didn't know how. As though I were some unsolvable riddle in her adult life. I'm not asking for a seat at the head table, I said softly. I'm not asking to walk you down the aisle. But I wasn't going to be erased. Not from this. Was this revenge? She asked. Cautiously. As if afraid of the answer. No, I said. It was memory. And maybe a little preservation. She didn't respond for a long time. I heard her inhale, long and shaky. So what happens now? She finally asked. That's up to you, I said. The wedding can go on. No changes. Just a signature on a form, and you'll never hear from the vineyard again. Or, you can pick another venue. You'd really block it? I haven't blocked anything. I've just reclaimed a piece of land where I once mattered. I could tell she was processing, spinning, trying to find the right frame. But this wasn't a courtroom. There were no closing arguments. Just a daughter, a father, and a vineyard full of ghosts. I need time, she whispered. I've already waited, I said. But take what you need. And then she hung up. No goodbye. Just the silence again. Only this time, it felt different. Not empty. Just open. She called again 4 nights later. I was sitting on the back porch with a glass of water, the air damp with the kind of fog that blurs everything just enough to make memory feel closer than it should. This time, I knew it was her before I answered. Hey, she said. Hey. No preamble. No pretense. Just the word, floating between us like it still meant something. I've been thinking, she started, then stopped. I waited. I've been trying to make sense of it, she continued. What you did. Why you'd do it now. After all this time. Her voice was tired. Not angry. Not wounded, either. Just worn down in the way people get when they finally run out of explanations. I took a slow breath. I didn't do it to stop anything. I wasn't trying to ruin your wedding. I know. I didn't want attention. I didn't want to be part of the spectacle. I know, she repeated, softer this time. Silence again. Then she said, I just don't understand why you didn't call. Why buy a vineyard instead of just reaching out? I stared out over the backyard. The rosemary bush I kept forgetting to trim. The cracked tile near the steps. All the small things I noticed when the big things went unspoken. I did reach out, I said. Over the years. Texts. Letters. Even just showing up when you needed something signed, or explained, or fixed. But after a while, I realized I wasn't part of the version of your life you were building. That's not true. Isn't it? She didn't argue. She just let the words sit. You know, I continued, after the divorce, I told myself I'd be the kind of father who waited. Who never pushed. Who made it easy for you to come to me when you were ready. I thought patience would make the difference. And it didn't? It made me invisible. She exhaled sharply. Not a scoff. More like a release. I didn't mean to erase you, she said. But there were years where it was just easier not to have to explain you. You didn't fit. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. You fit in a courtroom, she went on. Or in debates. Or with people who speak in footnotes. But not in the curated world I built. My friends didn't understand why you still used a flip phone or drove a 10-year-old car. You were complicated. And complicated didn't photograph well. She didn't deny it. I'm not saying that to hurt you, she added. I'm just trying to be honest. I want you to be. I waited, giving her space to speak. And slowly, she filled it. There were times, she said, when I did want to reach out. When I was overwhelmed or lost. But I didn't know how. I didn't want to reopen things. I thought you'd see right through me. I would have. That's what scared me. She paused, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint rustle of night wind against my windows. I felt guilty, she admitted, for how easy it became to leave you out. At graduations. Holidays. Now this wedding. It wasn't deliberate. But it wasn't innocent either. I felt something loosen in my chest. Thank you, I said. For saying that. I don't know how to fix it, she whispered. I'm not asking you to fix it. Then what are you asking? Nothing. No invitations. No gestures. I just wanted you to stop pretending I was never there. She didn't speak for a while. Then, quietly, she said, I remember the vines. The princess line. I was thinking about them when I picked the venue. I smiled into the dark. So it wasn't a coincidence. No, she said. It was a memory I couldn't quite shake. We sat there, separated by miles, but finally speaking the same language again, the language of unspoken grief, of choices made too young, of pride mistaken for protection. I'm not angry, Emily, I said. I think I wanted you to be, she replied. It would have made it easier. Well, I'm not. More silence. Then she asked, Are you going to block the wedding? No. Even if I don't offer anything? Even then. She didn't thank me. And I didn't ask her to. The point wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. Not yet. The point was that we'd finally stopped pretending. She stayed on the line a few minutes more, not saying much. Just breathing, listening. And for the first time in years, the silence between us felt clean. Not empty. Just honest. I parked 2 blocks down from the vineyard entrance, close enough to see the stone archway in the distance, but far enough to remain invisible. It was early, the kind of crisp, coastal morning that promises heat by noon. A soft fog still hovered above the vines like a curtain not yet lifted. I rolled down the window and let the air settle around me. There was no bitterness in my chest. No urge to interfere. I'd signed the papers 3 days ago, formal approval for the event. No restrictions, no fine print. Just one final act of consent. The kind no one could revoke. I watched as vans arrived. Caterers. Florists. Musicians hauling black cases of delicate instruments. A string quartet rehearsed faint notes that drifted through the trees, Vivaldi maybe. Or Pachelbel. One of those timeless wedding pieces that had been played so often it had lost its original grief. Cars began to pull in behind them, sleek rentals, polished SUVs, a few vintage convertibles. Guests stepped out dressed in carefully chosen fabrics, every hem and collar calibrated for 1,000 photos. Laughter carried across the distance like light through stained glass, beautiful, fractured, distant. I didn't resent it. I just observed. Emily had always loved this kind of setting. Even when she was young, she gravitated toward old stone buildings and twinkling lights. She once told me she didn't want a big city wedding, she wanted a sky you could see. I remembered that. I remembered everything. And now here it was. Her sky. Her story. Her beginning. I sipped from a thermos of lukewarm coffee, the same metal one I'd used on long drives to court back when my suits were sharper and my inbox never slept. I hadn't dressed up today. There was no need. I wasn't going inside. I wasn't here to be seen. A few more cars arrived. Voices, laughter, heels clicking on cobblestone. I caught a glimpse of a white dress through the open back door of one of the cottages. It moved quickly, like a ripple across still water. Then I saw her. Emily stepped into view. Hair pinned back in loose waves, the kind that look effortless, but require an hour of careful attention. Her dress was simple, elegant. Not overdone. Not dripping with tulle or sparkle. Just her. Grown. She stood near the terrace for a moment, speaking to someone, the planner, maybe. She smiled and nodded, composed, but her eyes kept flicking toward the entrance. Not nervously. Just curiously. Then, as if pulled by something she couldn't name, she turned her head and looked up the driveway. Not the front entrance. The other way. Down the road. Toward me. We were too far apart for details, but I could tell she was scanning. Searching for something. Or someone. She didn't wave. I didn't move. But the glance was enough. A breath. A pause. A thread. She turned back and disappeared into the noise of the day. The ceremony would begin soon. Vows would be read. Champagne would flow. Photographers would capture angles they'd crop and filter and post. Speeches would be made by people who knew her present well and her past not at all. And I would not be in any of the pictures. But I would be there in a different way. In the air. In the soil beneath her heels. In the vines that once held the laughter of a little girl who named them after princesses and swore they grew sweeter grapes. I didn't wait for the music to start. I finished my coffee, folded the napkin she'd once drawn on when she was 8, I had found it again the day before, and placed it back in the glove box. Then I started the car. As I pulled away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not because I didn't care, but because, finally, I didn't need to. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold, small, angled, slightly rushed, but unmistakably hers. Emily had always written with a kind of purposeful slant, like she was leaning into the words before they disappeared. I opened it at the kitchen counter, careful not to tear the edges. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. No greeting. No date. Just the letter. I didn't know what to say the day of the wedding. There wasn't a moment, or a place, or a script for it. But I saw you. Not clearly, not your face, but I knew. I looked toward the road and felt something I hadn't felt in years. I think it was you. And later, when the guests had gone and I stood alone by the vines, I knew for certain. I know what you did. And I think I understand why. I stopped reading there. Not because I didn't want to continue, but because those words hit like a tide, gentle, sure, but deep. I know what you did. Not said with blame. Not with accusation. Just recognition. I sat down, read the rest slowly. You didn't make a scene. You didn't show up uninvited or demand anything. You gave permission. Quietly. Fully. I don't know what that cost you, emotionally or otherwise. But it wasn't lost on me. After everyone left, I walked the property alone. I found the gazebo. The paint's still peeling. The princess vines are gone. But I remembered it all, the crate of grapes, the jam sandwich, your laugh when I tried to pronounce Cabernet and butchered it. I told people I picked Cypress Glen because of the view, or the layout, or the lighting. But that wasn't true. I picked it because I remembered. Some part of me wanted to be close to something I'd buried. Maybe that wasn't fair to you. Maybe it was selfish. But I think, in some strange way, you knew that. I folded the letter halfway, pressed my palm to it. She hadn't signed her name yet. No love, Emily. No closing line. Just one final paragraph. I'm not writing to fix everything. I'm not sure we know how. But I'm writing to say I see you now. Not as the man I avoided, or complicated, or stored away in old childhood drawers. But as someone who never left, even when I made it easy to. This isn't a reunion. But maybe it's a start. That was it. No PS. No return address. No instructions for what came next. Just a handwritten truth, folded and sent without ceremony. I read it again. Then once more. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. Not forgiven. Not restored. But acknowledged like a photograph pulled from the back of a drawer and dusted off. Faded at the edges, but still intact. I placed the letter in the old wooden box behind my bookshelf, beside the photograph of Emily at the vineyard gates. Then I closed the lid. Not to hide it, but to keep it. The day after the wedding, I signed the sale agreement. The holding company moved the shares quietly. No headlines. No congratulations. Just a clean transaction, executed through the same channels I'd used to acquire it. The buyer was another hospitality group, larger, glossier, with dreams of restoring the vineyard into something shinier than its roots ever asked for. That was fine with me. I hadn't bought it for its future. I had bought it to retrieve something buried in the past. Now, walking through Cypress Glen for the final time, I let my fingers graze the railing of the terrace, the sun warmed with still holding echoes of laughter from the night before. Rose petals clung to the gravel path like afterthoughts. A lone champagne flute sat forgotten on a stone ledge, half full, slightly tilted. Everything felt used but not ruined. Like a story told properly from beginning to end. I moved past the main building toward the far rows of vines. No more Princess Line, of course. The markers were gone. But I still remembered where they had been, second row from the west wall, fourth vine in. Emily's favorite. She'd once insisted they produced sweeter grapes because they liked the view. I smiled, just a little. By the old gazebo, a groundskeeper nodded at me. I returned the nod, then turned away. There was nothing left to do here. I hadn't visited to say goodbye. Not exactly. I just wanted to confirm that it was finished, that the version of me who once stood here, unsure, unheard, diminished, no longer lived on these grounds. The man walking out through those gates now wasn't angry. He was just done. Later that afternoon, I sat at my usual coffee shop, tucked into a corner booth by the window. A place where nobody knew my name, and that was precisely how I liked it. The barista had already learned that I preferred my coffee black and quiet, no foam, no chit-chat. I pulled a paperback from my coat pocket. One of those old legal thrillers I used to scoff at for being too dramatic, too clean. Now, I read them for the pacing, the simplicity. Life is rarely tidy. Stories are the only place we get to clean the edges. The letter from Emily wasn't with me. It was safe at home, resting in that wooden box behind the bookshelf. Alongside the photo, the drawing, the folded napkin. Evidence, I suppose, of a life lived carefully, if not always visibly. I read for half an hour before realizing I hadn't turned a page. I was watching people instead. A couple by the window holding hands. A young man typing too fast, his coffee untouched. An older woman reading the newspaper with a red pen, underlining entire columns. None of them knew who I was. None of them would guess what I'd just walked away from. And that was the point. I didn't need applause, or revenge, or even an invitation. I needed my voice back. And in some quiet, stubborn way, I had taken it. Without noise, without spectacle, without war, just through presence and patience. I closed the book, not because I was finished, but because I didn't need to keep reading. Outside, the sun had shifted slightly, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I sat there a little longer, sipping coffee, letting the moment settle. Not triumphant, but whole.